There is a kind of tiredness that settles into the bones long before the body admits it. And it was that tiredness Maren Ashgrove carried with her the evening she wandered off the coastal road and into the sleeping village of Nettlebrook. She had not meant to stop here. She had only meant to rest her feet for a moment, to sit somewhere quiet and let the ache in her shoulders ease before continuing on toward wherever it was she thought she was going. But the village had a way of holding onto travelers who arrived tired, the way a hand cups a small bird without meaning to keep it. The cobblestones beneath her boots were damp with early evening mist, and the shop fronts along the lane had already gone dark and gentle, their windows reflecting the lost soft blue of the sky. Somewhere behind her, the sea murmured against the rocks, low and unhurried, like a voice remembering an old lullaby it no longer needed to sing aloud. It was the light that caught her first, not the fading light of dusk, but a small, steady glow high above the rooftops, amber and patient, coming from a narrow window near the very top of a tall stone tower that rose above the village like a quiet sentinel. She had not noticed the tower until that moment, though it must have stood there for centuries, its clock face pale as a moon, its hands motionless at 9:15. Maren stopped walking. She did not know why the sight of that single lit window loosened something in her chest, but it did. Perhaps it was simply that she had been walking so long without anywhere to arrive, and here, at last, was a light that seemed to be waiting. She had left her old life 3 weeks ago now, though it did not feel like weeks. It felt like one long, unbroken evening that had never quite finished being evening. She had left quietly, without announcement, the way one slips out of a room during intermission, hoping to return before anyone notices the empty seat. She had not yet decided if she was running from something or walking toward it. She only knew that sleep had become a stranger to her, that her nights had grown thin and restless, and that somewhere in the last year she had misplaced the particular art of simply resting. The tower drew her nearer, though her feet made the decision before her mind agreed to it. The lane curved gently upward, past a shuttered bakery that still smelled faintly of warm bread, past a well with a mossy stone rim, until she stood at last before a low wooden door set into the base of the tower, its wood silvered with age, its iron hinges shaped like curling vines. There was no sign. There was no need for one. The door simply looked like it had been built to be found by exactly the sort of person who needed finding. She lifted her hand to knock, though something about the stillness of the evening made her pause first. The way one pauses before speaking in a library, or a chapel, or any place where quiet is not empty but full. When she finally knocked, the sound was soft. 3 gentle taps that seemed to be absorbed at once into the old stone, as though the tower had been listening for footsteps long before she arrived. For a moment, nothing happened. The sea continued its slow murmuring below the hill. A gull called once, far off, then fell silent. Maren found herself studying the door more closely. The whorled grain of the wood, a small brass plate near the handle worn smooth by countless palms before her own, and she wondered, not unkindly, whether she had imagined the whole idea of knocking at all. Then, gently, without any groan of hinges or announcement of movement, the door opened inward, spilling a warm wash of candlelight across the cobblestones, gold and soft, pooling around her boots like something poured rather than merely lit. Standing in the doorway was an old man with silver hair combed neatly back, wearing a long woolen coat the color of dark tea, and around his neck hung a small silver pocket watch on a chain, which he held loosely between 2 fingers, as though it were an old friend's hand he was simply keeping close. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked, if anything, as though he had been expecting her for some time, the way one expects rain after watching clouds gather all afternoon. "Ah," he said softly, his voice low and unhurried, carrying the faint warmth of someone who has spent a lifetime speaking gently to things that needed gentleness. "You found the light." Maren opened her mouth to explain herself, to apologize for the lateness of the hour, to offer some reason for standing at a stranger's door as evening slipped fully into night. But before she could gather the words, the old man simply stepped aside, motioning her in with an unhurried sweep of his arm, the pocket watch glinting once in the candlelight as he moved. "Come in from the cold," he said, The tower has been waiting, and though she would later struggle to explain why, Maren found that she believed him completely, and she stepped over the threshold into the warm hush of the tower, leaving the sea and the darkening lane behind her like a coat she had finally been allowed to set down. The air inside the tower was warmer than Maren expected, thick with the scent of beeswax and old paper, and something faintly like cinnamon, as though tea had been steeping somewhere nearby for a very long time. The ground floor opened into a round chamber, its curved stone walls lined floor to ceiling with shelves, and upon those shelves rested clocks of every size and shape she had ever imagined, and several she had not. There were small carriage clocks with delicate glass domes. There were tall case clocks with painted moon faces. There were clocks shaped like sleeping cats, their tails curled around the hour markers, and one small clock, no bigger than a teacup, whose hands moved so slowly that Maren could not, in the moment she watched it, detect any movement at all. None of them ticked in unison. Instead, their soft mechanical voices layered over one another in a gentle, uneven rhythm, like rain falling at different distances, near and far, near and far, until the sound became something closer to breathing than to time itself. The old man moved ahead of her without hurry, his coat brushing softly against the stone floor. And as he walked, he wound the small silver watch at his neck with two unhurried turns of his thumb, murmuring, "There now," in the quiet voice of someone comforting something small. "My name is Elden," he said, glancing back at her with eyes the pale gray of early morning fog. "Elden Whitlock. I keep the tower, and the tower, in its own patient way, keeps me." "Maren," she offered, her voice smaller than she intended, swallowed a little by the hush of the room. "Maren Ashgrove." "Ashgrove," Elden repeated, as though tasting the shape of it. A good name for someone arriving tired. Trees know how to rest standing up. Perhaps you have some of that in you yet. She did not know how to answer that, so she simply looked around her instead, letting her eyes travel over the impossible collection of clocks, each one gleaming faintly in the candlelight scattered throughout the room, set in brass sconces along the walls, and clustered atop a long wooden table at the center of the chamber. "Are they all yours?" she asked. "They are all the towers," Elden said, settling into a worn armchair near the hearth and gesturing for her to take the seat across from him. A low cushioned chair upholstered in faded green velvet, soft as moss beneath her when she sank into it. Some arrived with travelers, left behind out of forgetfulness, or something quieter than forgetfulness. Others were simply always here. I have long since stopped trying to separate the two. A fire glowed low in the hearth beside them, more ember than flame, casting a warm amber light that pooled across the stone floor and up the curved walls, mingling with the paler light of a tall window across the room, where the last blue of evening had deepened now into a soft, star-dusted navy. Elden reached for a small copper kettle resting on a trivet near the fire, and poured 2 cups of tea without asking whether she wanted any, the way one pours for family rather than guests. And he passed 1 cup to her with both hands, warm porcelain meeting her cold fingers. "You've been walking a long while," he said. It was not a question. Maren wrapped her hands around the cup and let its warmth settle into her palms. "I think I forgot how to stop," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty of it. Everything kept moving. I kept moving with it. And then one day I realized I hadn't slept properly in longer than I could remember. Elden nodded slowly, unbothered, as though this were the most ordinary confession in the world, one he had heard countless times before from countless other tired travelers who had found their way to this same low door. "The tower is good for that," he said simply. "It has kept time for a great many tired people over the years. Some stay an hour, some stay a season. It never seems to mind either way." He took a slow sip of his tea, and Maren noticed, in the quiet that followed, that his eyes drifted briefly to the small silver watch at his chest, and his thumb moved once again in that same unhurried circle, winding it gently, though it did not seem to need winding at all. It was, she realized, simply something his hands did when his heart wanted a moment to settle, the way some people hum or sigh or trace slow circles on the back of their own wrist. "There now," he murmured again, so softly she almost missed it. And then he looked up at her with something like a smile. "You are welcome to stay the night," he said. "There is a room above the second landing that keeps itself warm no matter the season, and a bed that has held a great many good, deep sleeps. Tomorrow, if you wish, I will show you the rest of the tower. Tonight, I think, you should simply be still." Maren looked down at the tea warming her hands, at the low fire breathing gently in the hearth, at the dozens of small clocks murmuring their soft, uneven rhythm around her. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, that stillness was something she might actually be allowed to have. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words felt larger than they sounded, filling some quiet, hollow space she had been carrying without noticing. Elden simply nodded, as though gratitude were something the tower expected in its own time, and reached again for the kettle to warm her cup. The room above the second landing was smaller than Maren expected, and somehow more comforting for it. A single round window looked out over the sloping rooftops of Nettlebrook toward the dark hush of the sea beyond, its glass slightly wavy with age, bending the moonlight into soft silver ribbons across the floorboards. A narrow bed stood against the far wall, piled high with quilts in muted shades of moss and amber, and beside it a small table held a single candle in a brass holder, already lit, its flame steady and unbothered by any draught, as though the tower itself had decided this particular light should not flicker. Elden had left her at the door with a quiet good night, his silver watch catching the candlelight one last time as he turned down the narrow stairwell, his footsteps fading into the layered ticking below like a stone sinking gently into water. Maren sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, simply breathing in the scent of the quilts, lavender, and something like old cedar, before she noticed the small writing desk tucked into the corner of the room, its surface bare except for a single drawer, slightly recessed into the wood, its brass handle worn smooth with age. She was not the sort of person who pried into other people's belongings, and yet something about the drawer felt less like an intrusion and more like an invitation, the way certain doors seem to want opening. She crossed the room and knelt before it, and found, to her surprise, that the drawer was locked, a small keyhole gleaming faintly beneath the handle, though no key was anywhere in sight. She did not try to force it. She only rested her fingers lightly against the wood, feeling its coolness, its quiet resistance, and something in her recognized the shape of that locked drawer as familiar, though she could not have said why. It reminded her, faintly, of the feeling she carried in her own chest most days, some small compartment of herself that had gone quietly locked without her noticing, its key misplaced somewhere along the tired miles of the last several years. She rose, undressed slowly, and slipped beneath the heavy quilts, and found that the bed was warmer than any bed had any right to be. Warm in the particular way of a hearth that has been tended all day, patient and deep. Outside her window, the tide continued its slow conversation with the Shah, and somewhere below her, through the floorboards, she could still hear the soft, uneven murmur of all those clocks, ticking not in agreement, but in a kind of gentle harmony, like voices humming different notes of the same quiet song. She thought she would lie awake, as she so often did, turning over old worries the way one turns over stones on a beach, looking beneath each one for something she couldn't name. But instead, she found her eyes growing heavy almost at once, her breathing slowing to match the unhurried rhythm of the tower around her. And just before sleep took her fully, she thought she heard, very faintly, footsteps pausing outside her door. She did not open her eyes. She only listened as the footsteps lingered a moment, unhurried, patient, and then withdrew again down the stairwell. And she felt, in some drowsy corner of her mind, that Elden had simply come to make sure her candle still burned steady, the way a parent checks on a sleeping child without needing to wake them. Sometime deeper in the night, she dreamed, though the dream was soft and formless, mostly light. She dreamed of the amber glow from the tower window as she had first seen it from the lane below. Except in the dream, she was somehow both the traveler looking up and the light itself, glowing patiently in the dark for someone not yet arrived. When she stirred once, briefly, near what she guessed to be the deepest hour of the night, she noticed that the candle on her bedside table had burned down only slightly, far less than the hours that must have passed, its flame still full and steady. And she found she did not have the energy to wonder at this for long before sleep pulled her back under. Gentler this time, deeper. The kind of sleep she had nearly forgotten her body was capable of holding. The tower, for its part, simply continued its quiet work around her. The layered ticking of its many clocks marking time, not with urgency, but with patience, as though each clock understood that some hours were meant to be spent slowly, and some travelers were meant to be allowed, at last, to rest. Far below, in the round chamber with the low fire, Elden sat a while longer in his worn armchair, winding his silver watch once more with 2 unhurried turns of his thumb, murmuring his quiet words to no one in particular, or perhaps to the whole sleeping tower itself, before he too settled back to let the night continue its slow, unhurried work. Maren woke to a softness she did not recognize at first, a kind of restedness that felt almost unfamiliar in her limbs, as though her body had forgotten, over many tired months, what it meant to wake without heaviness. The round window above her bed had filled with a pale, misty morning light, not quite sunrise, but the hour just before it, when the sky forgets, for a little while, whether it belongs to night or day. She lay still for several long minutes, simply listening. The tide below the hill had softened into something gentler, a slow hush rather than a murmur, and beneath her, through the old floorboards, she could still hear the tower's clocks, their layered ticking now folded into something that sounded, in the stillness of morning, almost like a lullaby remembered from very far away. She dressed slowly, in no hurry to leave the warmth of the room, and made her way down the narrow spiral stairwell, her hand trailing along the cool stone wall, worn smooth in places by countless other hands before hers. She expected to find Elden in the round chamber where they had shared tea the night before, but the chair by the hearth sat empty, the fire reduced now to a low, contented glow of embers. Instead, she noticed a second stairwell she had not seen before, tucked behind a curtain of deep green velvet, spiraling upward into shadow. Something in her, some quiet curiosity she had not felt in a long while, drew her toward it, and she climbed, one slow step at a time, past narrow windows that offered brief glimpses of the village below, its rooftops silvered with morning mist, the sea beyond it calm and pale as the sky. At the top of the stairwell, she found a room unlike anything below. It was smaller than the ground floor chamber, circular, with a domed ceiling painted faintly with constellations she did not recognize, silver against deep blue. And along every wall, on shelves carved directly into the stone, sat clock after clock, each one showing a different time entirely, none of them agreeing with the pale morning light spilling through the tall arched window at the room's center. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, simply taking it in, the way one takes in a room full of quiet, patient strangers. Ah, came Elden's voice from behind her, unhurried as always, and she turned to find him climbing the last few steps with a small brass watering can in one hand, tending, she realized, to a modest row of potted herbs that lined the windowsill, their leaves soft and silvery in the morning light. You found the hour room. What is this place? Maren asked softly, almost afraid to disturb the quiet with her voice. Elden set down the watering can and moved to stand beside her, his silver watch catching the pale light as he tucked his hands behind his back, surveying the room with the fondness of someone looking upon old friends. Every clock in this room once belonged to someone who could not, for one reason or another, hold onto a particular hour they needed, he said. An hour of rest they never got to take. An hour of goodbye they never finished saying. An hour simply lost to worry when it might have been spent gently instead. He gestured toward a small clock near the window, its face pale ivory, its hands frozen at 2:45. That one belonged to a young father who worked too many nights to notice his daughter learning to whistle. He left it here one winter, and in exchange, the tower gave him back a single evening to sit and listen to her properly. Maren studied the clock, and something in her chest tightened gently, not with sadness, but with recognition. And the tower just keeps them, the lost hours. It keeps them safe, Elden said, until whoever needs them finds their way back in one form or another. Some hours are reclaimed by the very people who lost them. Others are simply held gently, so the losing of them does not feel quite so final. He looked at her then, his pale gray eyes soft with something that felt, to Maren, uncomfortably close to understanding. You have one of your own in here somewhere, I imagine. Everyone who finds this tower usually does. Maren said nothing for a long moment, letting her eyes drift slowly across the shelves. The dozens of quiet clocks, each holding some small stolen piece of someone else's exhaustion, someone else's grief, someone else's forgotten rest. I don't know which one is mine, she admitted finally. Elden's expression did not change, but something in his voice softened further, the way a hand softens when it reaches for something fragile. That's all right, he said. The tower is patient. It has never once rushed anyone toward finding what they've lost. Come, there is breakfast waiting below, and perhaps, in time, the right hour will find you instead. And with that, he turned unhurriedly back toward the stairwell, his silver watch swinging gently against his chest, leaving Maren a moment longer in the quiet company of all those waiting clocks, feeling, for the first time in a long while, not lost, but simply, gently, on her way toward being found. Breakfast was simple and unhurried, laid out on the long wooden table in the round chamber. Warm bread with butter melting soft into its crust, a small dish of honey, and 2 cups of tea steaming gently in the cool morning air that drifted faintly through the tower's open door. Maren ate slowly, watching motes of dust drift lazily through a shaft of pale sunlight that had found its way in through the tall window. And Elden sat across from her, unhurried as ever, occasionally winding his small silver watch between sips of his tea, murmuring his quiet, "There now," as though comforting the watch itself for the trouble of keeping time in such a patient place. "You said the tower keeps hours for tired travelers," Maren said eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet between them. "Does it keep anything else?" Elden considered this with the unhurried thoughtfulness of someone who had been asked many questions over many years and had long since stopped needing to rush toward answers. "It keeps quite a lot of things in its own way," he said. "Mostly it keeps people, just for a little while, long enough for them to remember what stillness feels like before they carry on." He rose from the table, gesturing for her to follow, and led her out through a side door she had not noticed the night before. into a narrow garden nestled against the base of the tower, hidden from the lane by a low stone wall thick with climbing ivy. The garden was small but full, herbs and late blooming flowers growing in soft, unruly clusters, and at its center stood a modest sundial, its bronze surface dulled with age, though its shadow, Maren noticed, did not seem to match the position of the sun overhead. The tower keeps its own time here, Elden explained, noticing her gaze. Not the hurried time of the village, or the sea, or the roads beyond it. Something gentler. Some visitors find that a single night here stretches long enough to hold a full season's worth of rest. Others find a full season passes as quickly and quietly as a single evening. The tower simply gives each traveler the time they actually need, rather than the time the rest of the world insists on keeping. Maren looked around the small garden, breathing in the mingled scent of rosemary and salt air drifting up from the sea below, and felt something in her chest loosen further. Some knot she had been carrying so long she had nearly forgotten its shape. "How long have you kept this place?" she asked softly. Elden's expression grew distant for a moment, though not unhappy. The way one's face grows distant, recalling something fond rather than painful. "Longer than I can properly count," he admitted. "Long enough that I no longer remember which hours in that hour room upstairs might once have been my own. Perhaps that no longer matters. The tower gave me something better than getting them back. It gave me a place to simply be still in, and the quiet privilege of helping others find the same." He reached out and gently touched one of the herb plants growing along the garden wall, its leaves soft and silver green, and Maren noticed, not for the first time, the small unhurried rituals that seemed to shape every one of his movements. The winding of the watch, the murmured words to things too small to hear him, the careful, patient attention he gave to every corner of this quiet world he tended. "You remind me of my grandmother," Maren said, surprising herself again with the honesty of it. She used to hum while she watered her garden. Never any particular tune, just something low to keep her hands company. "Then perhaps," Elden said gently, "some part of her found her way here once too, long before you did. The tower has a way of drawing back the same gentle spirits, generation after generation, though it rarely announces the connection outright. It simply lets you notice it in your own time. They walked slowly along the narrow garden path as the morning grew fuller around them. The mist over Nettlebrook beginning to lift, revealing rooftops washed gold with early sunlight. And Maren felt, for the first time in longer than she could properly remember, no urgency at all to be anywhere else. "You are welcome to stay another night," Elden said as they returned toward the tower's side door. "Or several, if the tower agrees with you, which I suspect it does. There is no need to decide anything just yet. Rest first. Decisions are always lighter to carry after a good sleep." Maren looked back once at the sundial, its shadow still gently mismatched with the climbing sun, and found that she did not mind the mystery of it at all. Some things, she was beginning to understand, were not meant to be solved quickly. Some things simply asked to be sat with gently until their meaning revealed itself in its own unhurried time. "I think I would like that," she said. "Another night, maybe more than one." Elden smiled, the kind of small, warm smile that did not need to say anything further, and led her back inside, where the low fire and the layered ticking of 100 patient clocks welcomed them both home. Evening arrived slowly over Nettlebrook, the sky deepening by degrees from soft gold to lavender to a rich, star-scattered navy, and Elden led Maren up a narrow stairwell she had not yet explored, past the hour room, past a landing lined with old maps of coastlines she did not recognize, until they emerged onto a small stone balcony wrapped around the upper reaches of the tower, just below the great pale clock face itself. The air here was cooler, touched with salt from the sea below, and the whole of the village spread out beneath them in a gentle scatter of amber windows, each one glowing softly against the coming dark like a small, private hearth. Elden had brought 2 woolen blankets, thick and soft, and he settled one over Maren's shoulders before easing himself into a low wooden bench built into the curve of the balcony wall. Worn smooth with what must have been decades of quiet evenings just like this one. "I like to sit up here most nights," he said, "before the village fully sleeps. There is something to watching all those lights go out, one by one, like counting held breaths, finally released. Maren pulled the blanket closer and settled beside him, watching as indeed one window after another dimmed into darkness below, the village folding itself gently into sleep the way a hand folds closed around something small and precious. "Do you ever miss anything?" she asked quietly, keeping a place so separate from all of that. Ordinary life, moving on without you. Elden considered this with his usual unhurried patience, his thumb moving in its familiar, slow circle around the winding stem of his silver watch. "I did once," he admitted. "Long ago, before I understood what this place actually offers. I thought keeping the tower meant standing apart from the world, watching it move on without me the way one watches a train leave from a platform." He paused, glancing toward the darkening sea. "But I have come to think it is less like standing apart and more like holding a single, steady note beneath a much larger song. The village changes, the sea changes, travelers like you arrive and eventually continue on. And I remain here, humming that same steady note, so that whenever anyone grows tired of moving, there is somewhere quiet to rest against." Maren looked out at the last few lit windows below, their glow soft and amber against the deepening dark, and thought of her own life, the constant motion of it, the endless forward momentum she had mistaken for longer than she cared to admit for purpose. "I think I forgot how to hold still," she said softly. "Somewhere along the way, stillness started to feel like falling behind." Elden nodded slowly, unsurprised, the way one nods at a truth they have heard many times before from many other tired travelers. "That is a common misunderstanding," he said. "Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is simply movement so gentle it no longer frightens you. The tide is never truly still, and yet it rests every night against the same patient shore. Above them, the great clock face glowed faintly in the gathering dark, its hands still resting at their same 9:15 stillness, and Maren found herself studying it, wondering, not for the first time, whether the tower's clock had stopped entirely, or whether it simply moved according to some far gentler rhythm than the rest of the world recognized. "Does the big clock ever move?" she asked. "Rarely," Elden said, following her gaze upward. Only when someone finally finds the hour they came here looking for. Then, just once, it moves forward very briefly to mark the moment. I have seen it happen only a handful of times in all my years here, and each time, I confess, it remains one of my favorite things to witness. Maren tucked her knees up beneath the blanket and let herself lean, just slightly, into the quiet comfort of the evening. The soft weight of Elden's presence beside her, unhurried and undemanding, asking nothing of her except that she simply continue existing exactly as tired and unfinished as she currently was. Below them, the last lit window in the village finally dimmed, and the whole of Nettlebrook settled into a hush, broken only by the gentle murmur of the tide and the layered ticking drifting up faintly from the chamber far below. "Thank you," Maren said quietly, "for not asking me to explain myself. Everyone else always wants to know why I left, where I'm going, what I'm running from. The tower has never once needed a traveler's reasons," Elden said gently, rising slowly from the bench and offering her his hand to help her up. "It only ever needs their tiredness and the willingness to finally set it down for a while." He walked her back toward the stairwell, the great silent clock face glowing faintly above them in the deepening night. And Maren felt, walking beside him, that some small, stubborn part of her exhaustion had already begun, quietly and without her noticing, to loosen its grip. Several quiet days passed in a rhythm Maren had almost forgotten was possible. Days measured not by clocks, but by small, gentle rituals. Morning tea in the round chamber, slow walks through the hidden garden, unhurried afternoons spent reading in the soft velvet chair by the hearth while Elden tended, here and there, to the tower's many small needs. It was on one such afternoon, golden light slanting low through the tall window, that she found herself back in her room above the second landing, kneeling once more before the small locked drawer of the writing desk, drawn to it the way one is drawn without quite understanding why, to an old photograph or a half-remembered song. She had not thought of the drawer since her first night, but something in the quality of the afternoon light, warm and unhurried, made her curious again, and she ran her fingers slowly across its smooth wooden surface, tracing the small brass keyhole beneath the handle. It was then, in the low golden light, that she noticed something she had missed before. Faint letters, barely visible, etched into the wood just above the keyhole. Wan, soft with age, but still legible if she tilted her head just so. M. Ashgrove. She sat back on her heels, her breath catching gently in her chest, not with alarm, but with the strange, quiet wonder of recognizing something impossible as somehow gently true. She found Elden in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of late lavender, and she called to him softly, almost afraid to disturb the peaceful hush of the afternoon. Elden, she said, the drawer in my room. It has my name on it. He looked up at her, unsurprised, brushing soil gently from his hands as he rose. Does it? He said, not as a question, but as a quiet confirmation of something he had perhaps already suspected. I wondered, when you first knocked at the door, whether that room might be waiting for someone in particular. How is that possible? Maren asked, though her voice held more wonder than alarm. I've never been here before. I didn't even know this village existed until 3 days ago. Elden set down his small trowel and walked with her back toward the tower's side door, his silver watch swinging gently at his chest. The tower does not always wait for people who have been here before, he said. Sometimes it simply recognizes the shape of a particular tiredness long before that person arrives to carry it through the door. I imagine your name found its way onto that drawer quite some time ago, waiting patiently for you to grow tired enough in your own time to finally come looking for it. They climbed the stairwell together, unhurried, and stood once more before the small locked drawer. Its faint carved letters catching the last of the golden afternoon light. I don't have a key, Maren said softly. No, Elden agreed, and I suspect you are not meant to force it open with one, even if you had it. Some drawers open only when the person kneeling before them is finally ready for whatever waits inside. Keys in this tower tend to be far less important than patience. Maren knelt again before the desk, resting both palms lightly against the cool, wan wood, and closed her eyes, breathing slowly, letting the golden hush of the room settle over her the way the tower's quiet had settled over her These past several days, she did not know what she expected. Perhaps nothing at all. But as she knelt there, unhurried, unafraid, she found herself thinking gently and without urgency of all the small hours she had lost over the past several tired years. Evenings spent worrying instead of resting. Mornings rushed past without properly greeting the light. Nights spent staring at ceilings instead of sleeping soundly beside people she loved. She did not try to open the drawer by force. She simply allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to sit quietly with all of that lost time without flinching from it, without needing to immediately fix it or outrun it or explain it away. And as she knelt there, breathing slowly in the golden hush of the little room, she felt, very faintly, the smallest click beneath her palms, as though some old mechanism deep within the desk had simply, gently decided to loosen. She opened her eyes and looked up at Elden, who stood quietly in the doorway, watching her with the soft, patient expression of someone who has seen this particular quiet miracle unfold many times before. Not yet, he said gently, before she could ask. But soon, I think. The drawer is listening now. That is usually how it begins. And though the drawer remained closed a while longer, Maren felt, kneeling there in the fading gold light, no impatience at all, only the same unhurried, growing peace that had been gathering quietly inside her since the very first night she had followed a single amber light up the hill. That evening, over a simple supper of soup and warm bread, Elden told her, unhurried and without prompting, the story of how the tower had come to hold its many quiet gifts. It was not always a keeper of lost hours, he said, stirring his soup slowly, the steam curling upward into the candlelight. Long before my time, or so the tower has quietly shown me over the years, it was simply a lighthouse of sorts, though not for ships. For tiredness, Maren leaned forward slightly, warmed by the low fire and the soft weight of the evening settling around them. There have always been travelers, Elden continued, who grow so worn down by the ordinary weight of living that they lose track, somewhere along the way, of how to properly rest. Not sleep merely, but rest. The tower was built long ago by someone who understood that difference better than most. Someone who wished to leave behind a place where that particular kind of exhaustion could finally be set down gently, without judgment or hurry. "Do you know who built it?" Maren asked. Elden's expression grew soft and distant, the way it often did when memory folded quietly into the present moment. "Not entirely," he admitted. "The tower does not always share its full history, even with its keepers. I know only that whoever built it understood something essential. That rest is not something one simply falls into by accident, the way one stumbles into sleep after a long day. Real rest must sometimes be built carefully, the way this tower was built, stone by patient stone, so that when someone finally arrives tired enough to need it, the shelter is already standing, waiting." He reached for his silver watch and wounded gently, murmuring his familiar there now. And Maren found herself smiling faintly at the small ritual, no longer strange to her after several days in his company, but instead something like a lullaby she had come to quietly rely upon. "You do that so often," she said softly. "The watch, is it broken?" Elden looked down at the small silver face, its hands moving at their own unhurried pace, slower, she now realized, than any ordinary clock she had ever known. "Not broken," he said, "simply patient. It was given to me by the keeper before me, on the night I first arrived here, every bit as tired as you were on your first evening. She told me the watch would never rush me, no matter how urgently the rest of the world insisted I hurry. And in all my years here, it never has. I wind it not because it needs winding, but because the winding itself reminds my hands, and through them my heart, to slow down alongside it." Maren looked down at her own hands, folded quietly in her lap, and thought of all the years she had spent checking clocks, watches, the small glowing numbers on devices she carried everywhere, always chasing some invisible deadline that never once thanked her for the chasing. "I think I would like a ritual like that," she said quietly. "Something small that reminds me to slow down without me having to think too hard about it." "You may find one yet," Elden said gently. "The tower has a way of offering such things to those who stay long enough to notice them. Perhaps it will be a cup of tea, poured the same unhurried way each evening. Perhaps it will be a walk through the garden at the same soft hour each day. It rarely matters what the ritual is, only that it belongs entirely to you, and that it asks nothing of you except your quiet attention. They finished their supper slowly, the fire burning low and warm beside them, and afterward Elden walked her once more to the base of the stairwell, pausing, as he often did, to glance briefly toward the curtained entrance of the second stairwell leading up to the hour room, though he said nothing further about it that evening. Instead, he simply wished her a gentle good night, his silver watch catching the last of the firelight as he turned away. And Maren climbed the narrow stairs to her room, feeling, as she settled beneath the heavy quilts, that some quiet ritual of her own had already, without her quite noticing, begun to take root. The soft, particular way she now paused each night at her window, watching the moonlight ripple faintly across the dark water below, before allowing her eyes, at last, to close. Sleep came easily again that night, deep and unhurried, and somewhere in its gentle depths she dreamed briefly of the small locked drawer, its faint carved letters glowing softly gold, as though lit from within by a candle she had not yet learned to see. It was near the end of her first week at the tower that Maren woke before dawn, drawn from sleep not by any noise or worry, but by a quiet, unfamiliar stillness, the kind that seems to hum gently at the edge of hearing. She rose and dressed softly, careful not to disturb the hush of the sleeping tower around her, and made her way down through the round chamber, where the fire had burned down to the faintest orange glow, and out into the small hidden garden, still cloaked in the last soft gray of early morning. She found Elden already there, standing quietly beside the mismatched sundial, watching the horizon where the first pale hints of sunrise were just beginning to soften the dark edge of the sea. Couldn't sleep? He asked gently without turning. I slept plenty, Maren said, coming to stand beside him. I just woke up feeling like I was supposed to be somewhere. Elden nodded slowly, as though this made perfect sense. The tower has a way of waking people at exactly the right moment, he said. Come, I think there is something waiting for you upstairs. They climbed together, unhurried despite the quiet urgency humming faintly beneath Maren's ribs. past the round chamber, past the curtained stairwell, up into the small bedroom above the second landing, where the pale grey light of early morning had just begun to spill softly through the round window. Maren knelt before the writing desk once more, resting her palms against the cool, familiar wood. And this time, without any hesitation at all, she felt the small mechanism beneath her hands loosen fully, the faintest click echoing softly in the quiet room, and the drawer slid open at last, smooth and unhurried, as though it had simply been waiting all this time for her to stop bracing against whatever she expected to find inside. Inside the drawer lay a single object, a small, delicate pocket watch, its silver casing tarnished gently with age, its glass face slightly clouded, though the hands beneath it, she noticed, with a soft intake of breath, were moving slow and steady, keeping some quiet time of their own. She lifted it carefully, cradling it in both palms, and turned it over to find, engraved on the back in small, careful letters, a single line: "For the hours you forgot to keep for yourself." Her eyes filled, not with sadness, but with something gentler, some quiet grief finally being allowed its due after being held too long at arm's length. All those forgotten evenings, all those mornings rushed past without notice. All those quiet moments of rest she had denied herself in the endless hurry of simply trying to keep up. Elden knelt beside her, his own silver watch swinging softly at his chest, and rested one weathered hand lightly on her shoulder. "That is yours," he said softly. "It always was, waiting here since long before you knew to come looking for it." "What do I do with it?" Maren asked, her voice thick but calm. "Wind it," Elden said simply. "Slowly, the way you might wind mine, if you'd like to try. And each time you do, in whatever life waits for you beyond this tower, let it remind you that rest is not something you must earn through exhaustion. It is something you are always, quietly, allowed to keep for yourself." Maren turned the small winding stem gently between her fingers once, twice, feeling the faint resistance of the old mechanism give way beneath her patient touch. And as she did, she became aware of a soft sound rising from somewhere far below. The great clock atop the tower, stirring at last from its long stillness, its massive hands moving forward briefly, audibly, mocking the moment with a single deep, resonant chime that rolled gently out over the whole sleeping village. Elden smiled, the warmest smile she had yet seen from him, and glanced upward toward the sound with quiet, familiar affection. "There," he said softly, "I told you it happens, now and then." Maren looked down at the small watch in her palms, its hands now moving steadily alongside her own quiet breathing, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could properly measure, that the exhausted, hurried version of herself she had carried for so many tired years had finally, gently, been allowed to set something down. Outside the round window, the first true light of sunrise spilled soft and gold across the rooftops of Nettlebrook, gilding the mist rising off the sea, and Maren sat quietly a while longer beside Elden in the growing morning light, her new watch resting warm and steady in her open hands, no longer lost, no longer forgotten, simply and finally hers to keep. Maren stayed at the tower 3 more days after that soft, chiming morning, though it might, by the tower's own gentle reckoning, have been 3 weeks, or perhaps only 3 unhurried breaths. Time, she had come to understand, moved differently within these old stone walls, and she found she no longer felt any particular need to measure it precisely. On her final evening, she sat once more with Elden on the small stone balcony beneath the great clock face. 2 woolen blankets drawn close against the cool night air, watching the amber windows of Nettlebrook flicker softly to life below as the village settled into its own quiet evening rhythm. "You'll be leaving soon," Elden said, not with sadness, but with the same unhurried acceptance he seemed to bring to everything. "I think so," Maren said softly, turning the small silver watch over in her fingers, its hands moving steady and slow beside her own quiet heartbeat. "I don't feel like I'm running from anything anymore. I think I just want to go back and be tired a little less often. Rest a little more on purpose instead of only when I finally collapse into it." Elden nodded, his own watch glinting faintly in the gathering starlight. "That is, I think, exactly what the tower hoped you would find here," he said. "Not an escape from your life, but a gentler way of carrying it. They sat quietly a while longer, listening to the soft murmur of the tide below, the layered ticking of the towers, many patient clocks rising faintly through the stone beneath them. And Maren felt no urgency at all in the silence between them, only a warm, settled peace, the kind she suspected she might carry with her now, tucked quietly alongside her new small watch, wherever the roads ahead chose to lead her. Will I be able to find this place again? She asked eventually. If I ever need to. Elden considered this with his usual patient thoughtfulness. The tower does not always appear the same way twice, he admitted. Sometimes it is a clock tower by the sea. Sometimes, I suspect, it takes other shapes entirely for other tired travelers. A quiet library, a hidden garden, a lighthouse standing watch over some other dark and unfamiliar shore. But I do not think you will need to find it again. Exactly. I think, now that you carry your own small watch and your own small rituals of rest, you may find you are able to build a little of this tower's quiet stillness wherever you happen to be. Maren looked down at the watch once more, and then out at the softly lit windows of the sleeping village, and felt something settle gently and completely into place within her. Some old ache finally, quietly, easing. Thank you, she said, for not asking me to hurry through any of this. Elden smiled, the same warm, unhurried smile she had come to know so well over her short time here, and reached over to rest one weathered hand briefly atop hers. Thank you for finally allowing yourself to be found, he said. That is no small thing, you know. Tiredness is a heavy coat to wear alone. I am glad you let this old tower help you carry it a while. They sat together a little longer beneath the great silent clock face, its hands resting once more at their familiar patient stillness, until the last of the village lights below dimmed softly into sleep, one gentle window at a time, and the whole of Nettlebrook settled into the same deep, unhurried hush that had first drawn Maren up the hill nearly 2 weeks before. The next morning, she left the tower as quietly as she had arrived, pausing only once at the low wooden door to look back at Elden, who stood in the doorway with his silver watch glinting softly in the morning light, unhurried and warm as ever, offering her a small, knowing nod, the kind exchanged between people who understand that some goodbyes are simply gentler versions of see you again. She walked back down the misty lane, past the shuttered bakery, past the mossy stone well, her new watch resting warm and steady in her coat pocket. And though she could not have explained it fully to anyone who might have asked, she felt, walking away from that quiet tower and its gentle keeper, not as though she were leaving something behind, but as though she were finally, after so many tired years, carrying exactly enough. Somewhere behind her, faint and unhurried, she thought she heard the great clock chime once more, soft and low, marking the quiet completion of an hour-long overdue. And as the morning light spread gold and gentle across the sleeping coastline, Maren Ashgrove walked on, rested at last, carrying her small silver watch and the tower's quiet lesson close against her heart. That rest is never something to be earned through exhaustion, but simply, always, something we are allowed, gently, to keep